It's also my great privilege today to introduce the next speaker, and he's a man whose name is synonymous with the good fortunes of our school. It's not hyperbole when I say that I can't think of anyone else who comes close to matching his longevity, long-term vision, and unerring dedication to the business school and to the University of Pittsburgh. And you all know that I'm talking about Dean Emeritus and Professor of Business Administration Jerry Zoffer. It's hard to believe that this marks the 60th anniversary of the year Jerry earned his bachelor's degree in business from Pitt. I don't think he realized it then, but Jerry was only getting started. And I have to say right now, before I get started on the rest of the introduction for Jerry, it's my pleasure to introduce another special guest, Chancellor Mark Nordenberg, who is going to come to the podium and has a special announcement and recognition to give.
I thought I had snuck in the back. I didn't even know that John knew I was here. But good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you. I'm glad that John permitted me to crash your party and give me this opportunity to speak. It is great to be here with you as we celebrate the 225th anniversary of the founding of the University of Pittsburgh, as we reconnect with Pitt and with each other as a part of the largest homecoming in our history, and as we prepare for those of you who have not yet received an inkling of this for an historic capital campaign announcement that's going to come in about 2 hours. However, with the Dean's permission, I want to take just a few moments to talk about my friend Jerry Zoffer on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of his graduation from this school. Jerry and I became deans of our respective schools at about the same point in our lives. I think we were 37 or 38 years old. The term boy dean probably could have applied to each of us. However, Jerry's appointment came 19 years before mine, when I was still a sophomore in college. And even so, he outlasted me as a dean. I'd like to think that says something about his strength and not about my own inadequacies, but I'm not sure of that. There probably is a natural bond between business school deans and law school deans, and Jerry and I were consistent allies within the Council of Deans here at Pitt. But the core of our relationship went far beyond that. We were friends. Jerry was a mentor to me, and I was one of his biggest admirers. As you all know, Jerry is a symbol of perseverance and fortitude. His name is synonymous with quality and creativity. He is politically adroit and personally loyal. He always placed the interests of his school and of Pitt far above his own. He earned the title University Leader early in his career and has carried that title with distinction ever since. In fact, when I became Chancellor, one of my most important challenges was recruiting a new Senior Vice Chancellor for the Health Sciences and Dean of the School of Medicine. and I did what any sensible person would do in that situation. I made Jerry the chair of the search committee. He brought me a wonderful candidate who many years later is still serving with distinction in that position. And putting things more generally, to say that Pitt and our schools of business are better places because of Jerry Zoffer would be a gross understatement. His tireless efforts produced dramatic institutional improvements, and his enthusiasm and personal warmth positively touched the lives of thousands of others, which seems particularly noteworthy in this year that we are celebrating 225 years of building better lives. Jerry, as you know, medallions have a long history in academia and are used as a means of commemorating special occasions and recognizing special people. The University of Pittsburgh presented its first anniversary medallion with its bicentennial medallion in 1987. As we approached our 225th birthday, we decided that we should use this occasion to recognize another group of outstanding graduates. And so I charged a committee that included the president of the Alumni Association and the immediate past president of the association, as well as some of my senior team members, to scour the list of some 300,000 University of Pittsburgh graduates and to recommend deserving honorees to me. Our 225th anniversary medallion depicts the progress of the university from a log cabin academy to the Cathedral of Learning. Each medallion also features the names and likenesses of two people who helped lay the foundation from which we do our important work today. Those historic figures are William Pitt, after whom our city and our university are named, and Hugh Henry Brackenridge, our founder. The third name on each medallion is the name of the recipient. In this case, that name is H.J. Zoffer. Given the strength of our alumni group, we plan to present a number of these medallions in the months ahead. But the first two are being presented today. And I wanted to make certain that you were among that very small first group. I extend this honor in recognition of all that you have accomplished professionally, with gratitude for all that you have contributed to Pitt, and with respect for the values that have characterized your life and your career. So if you will come forward, I will actually make the presentation. I'll bet you anything this photographer would like a photograph of the three of us. John. Here we are, one-take wonders. I don't know whether that meant that he thought he had real good material that he was dealing with this camera, or whether he thought it's not going to get any better. But at least we're done. A happy homecoming, everyone. It is nice to be with you.
Since no one could do a better introduction than that, without any further delay, Jerry Zoffer.
Thank you very much, and welcome, fellow survivors. It has been a while since I've been privileged to join the 51-plus luncheon, since usually on this date I am in New York at the meeting of a foundation on whose board I serve. But this year, they changed the meeting date, so I'm able to spend the 60th anniversary of my graduation from the Pitt School of Business Administration with all of you. And I am grateful for your willingness to put up with me. This is a real privilege, since we are all survivors. There are certain things that I can speak of only with fellow survivors if I intend to see a glimmer of recognition on the face of my audience. After all, who else can I reminisce with about Jim Rossell, Bill Frazier, Clarence Van Sickle, and Stanley Jablonski, who taught us what all accountants need to know, that the debits are by the window and the credits are by the wall. Or with whom else can I share the memory of marketing professor Aaron DeBoer, explaining what the 7 reasons for department stores were? Or finance professor Leroy Shattuck, who, by the way, is the only one of these professors who is still alive, at least the last time I looked, and who's probably over 100 by now, who taught us that the stock of Santoy Mining at 12 cents per share was as good a stock bargain as we were ever going to find. Or Miles Jones, who taught us business law, always at 8:30 a.m. because he had to be in his law office by noon, and who took pleasure in marching up to students for whom sleep had overcome them in class, and hurling the business law textbook of 800 pages onto the concrete classroom floor with a noise so loud the Sleeping Beauty generally ended up on the floor with the business law textbook today. Now, these are not the things that business students study today, nor do they have such interesting experiences, but more about that later. Yes, we have many memories to share, and that is one of the pleasures of being a survivor. But there are costs to being a survivor. I have a couple of women friends who are about our age and who play gin rummy with one another every Friday at 2 o'clock for 40 years. One day recently, as they shuffled the cards, Mary said to Jane, "Jane, I have an important question to ask you. Please don't be upset with me, but what is your name?" Jane looked directly back at her, eyeball to eyeball, and said sweetly, "How soon do you need to know?" But how lucky we are that we are still ambulatory in one fashion or another, and can join with other survivors in lunches like this to remember our days together in the good old School of Business Administration, to find people who remember our days and share the joys and pains of being a survivor, and who have the privilege of looking forward and enjoying the progress which more than 50 years of additional living has brought us. As for me, you may remember I started out as a teacher of insurance, a subject we no longer offer, and I ended up almost 60 years later as a teacher of ethics and social performance. I'm not sure what that says about either field, but it certainly was a strange journey. In between, I spent about 35 years as an administrator. My first job as an assistant dean was to close down my beloved School of Business Administration, because the new chancellor, Edward Litchfield, had decreed that Pitt would become an elite school with one big prestigious school of liberal arts surrounded by a group of first-class professional schools like law, and business, and engineering, and social work. He started with business because he was the dean of the business school at Cornell before he came to Pitt. And I was designated to shut down the undergraduate school, just as my boss, Marshall Robinson, was brought in to build a graduate school of business. Of course, Litchfield's plan stopped with the undergraduate business school's demise because he plunged the university into virtual bankruptcy because of the debts he incurred and forced our affiliation as a state-related university. Most of you remember what happened. We closed the undergraduate business school down, and the last degree was given about 1964. What that means is that beginning in a couple of years, there will be no more undergraduates eligible to attend this lunch, except for me and all of you, until the graduates of the new undergraduate college will have been out 51 years. That will occur, ladies and gentlemen, in 2047. And that reflects this strange story. My first administrative job was to shut down the undergraduate business school, and my last administrative job was finally to start it up again in 1996. That was a goal I had from the day I closed it down in 1962. I wanted to find a way to open it up again. As I moved into different administrative roles, finally as dean of your schools in 1968, I knew that I wanted to see the undergraduate school back in place before I hung up my deanly shoes. But it took 32 years. Maybe that says how ineffective I was as an administrator. But you have to understand what the impediments were. The liberal arts faculty was adamantly against it because they felt it would take away some of their students. The business school faculty were opposed to it because they preferred at that time, though no longer, to teach only graduate students. The chancellor was against it, not this great chancellor, but another one, for a variety of reasons, and so was the provost, the chief university academic officer, opposed. The only people in favor of it, except for you and me, were the alumni of the School of Business Administration, and there were a lot of prominent alumni out there, some of you included, who lent me a hand. Finally, in 1996, we started from scratch. And today, the school is 2,000 strong. It has prospered under the direction of Dr. Edward Palasek, our undergraduate associate dean, and the support of the dean of both of our schools, Dr. John Delaney. As you may know, Ed Palasek is retiring next year, an action I have strongly advised him against. But he has earned a rest after nearly 2 decades of shepherding a handful of students into a vibrant 2,000-person student body. But the news of the group's future is not marked only by the bad news of having to wait until 2047 to get new undergraduates into our mix. It has a good side also. We began to graduate MBAs into our new program around 1961. And the graduates of that program should begin celebrating their 51st anniversary of their graduation this year. So next year, when all of you will hopefully return, you may be joined by graduates of the MBA program who will, at that point, start to become eligible to join your exclusive society. But enough of the past. If you have further questions about it, we'll leave a little time at the end of this meandering for you to inquire. So let's talk a bit about the present and the future. I always felt that a major advantage of spending so much of my time and career in the administrative suite was that I could dream big dreams about what seemed to be the next steps forward in management education. Once I had an idea, I had to make sure others thought it made sense and then find a way of getting it implemented, subject to fiscal and colleague restraints. Ideas seem to fall in 3 categories. A few, very few, were great ideas. Everyone agreed, and it was fiscally possible to implement them in an expeditious manner. But most of my ideas fell into the other two categories. The first were ideas, great as they were, whose time had not yet come. And there was some thought that their time might never come. The second category included a group of bad ideas that seemed brilliant in my conceptual process, but turned out to be bombs when they hit the reality of day. It's easy to find successes and brag about them, but I'd like to share with you some of my failures. Not because I like to boast about my failures, because I still think they're pretty good ideas. They do represent an example of the tensions that accrue between administrators who are often, like John Delaney and me, focused on the future, and faculty who are proud of what they do and cautious about flying into uncharted clouds where clarity is not yet completely apparent. For example, some years ago I thought corporations, the organization we refer to in our organizational behavior core course, were changing rapidly, and that we ought to restructure our organizational behavior course into a new course called Organizational Transformation to suggest how everything in organizations was changing. I went to see Bob Kirby, who was at that time chair of our Board of Visitors and also CEO of Westinghouse, and asked him what he thought. He looked at me straight in the eyes and turned over a paper on his podium, just like this one. He had no desk because he worked standing up, and visitors got out pretty fast because they were not invited to sit down. And on this paper was the title, Westinghouse Organizational Transformation. He cautioned me never to say a word about his paper because he hadn't shared it yet with his top management team. But I was overjoyed to see that one of my ideas to change the curriculum was right in line with the CEO of a major organization, and that he was thinking in the same manner. So I went back, and I cajoled the faculty into making the change. But I overlooked one major crucial element. Other schools had not yet done this, and the faculty who would teach the course were not exactly sure how to do it. And they had few, if any, role models. Student reaction to their efforts was negative, and faculty who had to teach it were ill-equipped to do so. I put this in the category of great ideas whose time has not yet come. I might add that while we teach a lot more organizational transformation today, the course is still called Organizational Behavior. Another one of my brilliant ideas that went nowhere was the notion that in spite of, quote, casual Fridays, unquote, or, quote, dress down Tuesdays, unquote, there was a certain dress code in place at major corporations the rest of the week. Since we were preparing students to enter that environment at reasonably high levels, it seemed reasonable to consider the classroom as the workplace of the students. I reasoned that with men in suits and ties and women in similarly appropriate dress, the seriousness of the academic process would be greatly enhanced. Just as graduates would dress appropriately when they went to work, students would dress appropriately for their current work, which was to enter the classrooms and learn how to be a manager. All of this seemed perfectly logical to me, so I got out a memorandum announcing the new policy. Of course, there was some grumbling. A delegation of women came to tell me that for them to dress the way I wanted would take a clothes budget far beyond what they could afford. But I convinced them they needed to get used to such expenses, since in a short while they would be in the corporate world and facing the same problem. So I smiled broadly, which is what deans do when they are under attack. And I moved on. But then the roof caved in. A delegation of faculty arrived to tell me that if students were to be forced to dress up for class, they would have to also, a fact which had not escaped me. Then they went on to say that no dean was going to tell them how to dress when they faced the students. Smiling was no longer a cure for this problem. So we all went back to casual dressing, And my idea that more formal dressing would lead to a more serious classroom performance landed on the ash heap of bad ideas. Well, what about the future? While I'm still dreaming away, the show goes on. Under Dean Delaney's visionary guidance, significant curriculum revisions have taken place, and they're all headed in the right direction. My concern is that they do not go far enough to reflect the major changes that have occurred in the world around us. So I will share with you what I would do if I could wave my magic wand and make all the changes I feel are appropriate. Remember, my great ideas often end up in the ash heap. But have no concern. I would still include the basic disciplines of business like accounting and marketing and finance in my required core. Just a little bit less of them in the required curriculum to make room for the new areas I think a globalized world calls for. The global enterprise curriculum I envision would, I believe, respond directly to corporate expectations for our graduates. It would add to the core curriculum a whole series of new required courses, which of themselves would redefine what a business school graduate might look like in the future. The important thing to remember is that I see all of these courses as being required of every graduate. There would still be room for traditional majors and for electives, but Pitt could brag that every graduate possessed the skills these new courses would provide for them. And most importantly, I think the new courses would reflect the talents that corporate employers might expect of business school graduates. Some of these courses have never been taught in business schools. Some of them would require new teachers with different talents being added to the faculty list. But these are all details that could be worked out. Besides, dreamers never bother themselves with details. They just look at the big picture. The rationale for all of this reflects the fact that today, everything worldwide seems connected to everything else worldwide, and the internet has given us speeds of communication and methods of transmission of technologies that defy the imagination. When a government in Greece spends more money than they can afford, the value of your and my investments goes down immediately. Our interest rates are affected by who wins elections in various countries around the world. Some of you may remember Wendell Willkie, who was a failed presidential candidate 70 years or so ago. He wrote a book titled One World, and that vision has certainly come about. I believe our employers want our graduates to be creative in their problem solving and to be able to think well outside of the traditional box. To respond to this need, I would add a required course in, quote, innovation and creativity in a global enterprise world. And yes, creativity can be taught. We have an elective course in that subject, which is jammed with students, and I think all of our students need to consider stretching their capacities in this area. I believe our employers want graduates with a knowledge of the cultures and economics of countries like Brazil, Russia, China, and India, the so-called BRIC countries. Many of our graduates will be posted to assignments in those countries as more of our domestic companies find higher and higher percentages of their income stream coming from operations in countries other than our own. This would suggest a new required course titled, quote, Operating in World Cultures, unquote. I believe employers want graduates who are aware of current and prospective developments in fields related to management, such as bioengineering, medicine, quantum mechanics, political science, public administration, and so on. Developments in those fields occur every year, and many of them do have relevance to the business management environment. I would add a required course in, quote, managerial implications of developments in related disciplines. The curriculum would need to change every year depending on developments in the underlying fields. Can you imagine what would happen if I presented that to the curriculum committee? I believe employers want graduates who understand ethical controversies, corporate governance, and the issues of corporate social responsibility. And I am pleased to tell you that with Dean Delaney's support, every major program in our schools, from undergraduate to part-time MBA to full-time MBA to executive master's programs, now requires all students to learn how to analyze ethical quandaries and how to make decisions in their personal and business lives which consider the ethical ramifications of their actions. I believe employers want graduates who understand how to negotiate with the superiors, with coworkers, with customers, with suppliers, and with other stakeholders in both domestic and international domains. I would propose a new required course in, quote, negotiation and group dynamics in multicultural environments. I did that so it would impress the faculty. I believe employers want graduates whose leadership skills have been honed to a sharp edge and who understand the importance of having followers in their environment who will implement creative initiatives developed by the organization's leadership team. And they want graduates who understand how to work effectively in teams. To develop these skills, I would add a required course in, quote, a teamwork approach to the process of developing creative leaders and followers, unquote. I believe employers want graduates who have the facility of thinking logically in an evaluative manner and speaking well and convincingly. I would add a new required course in, quote, critical thinking and effective communication for managers, unquote. I believe employers want graduates who have ongoing experience in dealing with challenges in international environments, not their own. This suggests a new required course to be called, quote, the Global Research Practicum, which will include an overseas internship or a period of study abroad, with some courses taken for credit in international schools with which the University of Pittsburgh will establish partnership arrangements. Now, I am not the ultimate visionary who thought up these courses in the middle of the night. Some of them and variations of them are taught primarily in an elective format, but sometimes as required courses. At Pitt and all over the business school world, here and there, some of these courses are being offered. But nowhere can we find a school that offers and requires them all. I dream that such an offering would create a new pattern for management education. Certainly there will be problems. Who will teach them? How do we finance the addition of these very different faculty people? Why should we teach some of these courses which might more appropriately be taught in liberal arts schools but not in management schools? As you can imagine, I have answers to all of those questions. And for good measure, I have one final suggestion that would probably instigate a faculty contract with one of those organizations that are set up to get rid of unwanted debris, and that would ease me out of my comfortable office. As someone who trained to be an accountant and then who blew it all away to go in other directions, I know what it's like to be in one of what we in management education call the silos in departments of accountancy, finance, marketing, and so on. I believe today most of those traditional disciplines have become multidisciplinary. That is, they're affected significantly by other fields. As I shoot off towards the nearest cloud to set up my new residence, I would like business schools to follow the Yale School of Management initiative, which essentially eliminated these silos and now has joint teaching in those fields between the followers of the discipline and devotees of other disciplines that impinge upon the basic discipline. Of course, the dean that advocated this at Yale lasted only 24 months before he was attracted to greener pastures. So now you know what I do when I'm not serving on the 3 boards of directors that will still put up with me, teaching my courses in business ethics and social responsibility, researching with colleagues currently trying to shine a new light on the Israeli-Palestinian controversy, and trying to act as a tourist to those traveling to those countries where I, as a dean, spent many hours in business but never had a chance to see the country and its blandishments and its citizens in a very personal way. Thanks for listening and dreaming along with me. If you and I are both lucky, perhaps we can gather again in 5 years when I hopefully will celebrate my 65th anniversary of graduation from the business school. I invite you now to join me. And whether they roll me in, or give me a walker to propel myself in, or the message from me comes from my cloud and arrives by lightning, please know I will never forget my 60th anniversary and your kindness in sharing it with me. Thank you, and feel free to ask any questions you may have.